They say a man's life can change between one breath and the next. That night in Edo, the breath that changed everything was filled with laughter, and then with silence. Inside the Ochaya, lanterns swayed like captured moons. Music floated like incense, until a noble named Yasumori shattered it with a single insult, aimed not at a geisha's art, but at her soul. Akiko's hands trembled around the shamisen string. The note she meant to play died before it was born. At the far corner, Rintaro looked up. The scarred samurai who had sworn never again to draw his sword, the man who once failed to protect a voice just as gentle, felt the old fire return. He rose slowly, his movement as measured as the falling ash from a lantern wick. "Apologize," he said, his tone calm, almost tender, "or the next sound in this house will not be music." No one moved. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Yasumori's smile cracked. "Careful, Ronin," he hissed. "Words can cost lives." Rintaro met his eyes. "Then choose yours wisely." The noble turned, laughter curdling into rage as he left. The door slid shut behind him, with a sound like steel drawn in the dark. Outside, the night was already shifting. Lanterns flickered on distant rooftops, and the quiet streets began to hum with the footsteps of men obeying a wounded pride. That same night, 70 warriors would come for the samurai who spoke too softly and meant every word. The laughter never truly returned to the tea house after that moment. When Rintaro spoke, even the wind seemed to vanish from the paper walls. Yasumori's smirk froze, the color draining from his face as if struck by a blade he could not see. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the young noble laughed, a sharp, broken sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You forget your place, Ronin," he hissed. "You defend a woman who sells illusion, and you shame your own blood in front of men of standing." Rintaro didn't blink. "Then remember yours," he said. "Even illusion deserves respect." The noble's hand twitched toward the short dagger at his sash. But he stopped. Something in Rintaro's eyes told him what would happen if he moved even a finger more. He forced a smile, mocking and cold. "Enjoy your tea, samurai," he whispered. "You'll drink it alone before dawn." He stood, dropped a few coins on the floor, too many, too loud, and left. The door slid shut behind him, with a finality that felt like a closing gate. The others in the room exhaled all at once, as if the air had been held hostage. The old attendant bowed deeply to Rintaro, whispering thanks he didn't hear. Akiko kept her eyes on the floor, trembling hands clutching the shamisen like a shield. Rintaro approached her. "You did nothing wrong," he said softly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You shouldn't have spoken, Rintaro. You don't know who he is." "I know enough," he replied. "A man who mocks beauty only reveals his own emptiness." He bowed and left the Ochaya, stepping into the cool spring night. The street was quiet, too quiet. The moonlight spilled across the cobblestones like a blade's reflection. Half an hour later, Yasumori's anger found its target. Inside a private hall on the hill above the district, he threw a cup against the wall, shattering it. "The ronin humiliated me," he snarled. "Daigo." His captain waited beside the door, arms crossed. "Unreadable." "Then restore your name," Daigo said simply. A whisper travels fast in Edo. By morning, that insult will reach every ear. "How many men do we still have stationed in the city?" Yasumori asked. 70, Daigo said. "Enough to erase a memory." "Then erase him." Daigo hesitated for a heartbeat. "He's no fool." "He'll expect us. Then make sure he's out of breath before dawn." The sound of boots came long before the first lantern lights reached Rintaro's home. He had felt it in the air, something heavy, deliberate. He'd spent the last hour in silence, sitting near the open door, the katana resting across his knees. When the knock came, it wasn't a knock at all. It was the clang of a spear against wood. "Rintaro of the Fallen Crest," a voice barked. "By order of Lord Yasumori, step outside and surrender your blade." Rintaro didn't answer. The kettle whistled softly behind him. He poured one last cup of tea. Then he heard another sound. Footsteps, lighter ones, hurried. He turned. Akiko appeared at the corner of the street, her lantern half covered by her sleeve. Her face was pale, frightened. "They're coming from every road," she said breathlessly. "I heard them gathering near the river. 70, maybe more." Rintaro set the cup down gently. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should they," she answered. For a moment neither spoke. The night pressed closer, the wind carrying the faint creak of armor. Rintaro took her hand, just for a second. "Whatever happens, stay inside. And if I fall, leave this place before dawn." Akiko's lips parted to answer, but the sound of a shouted order cut through the dark. The first line of soldiers advanced, lanterns swaying like fireflies in formation. Rintaro stepped into the courtyard, sliding the door open behind him. The old boards creaked under his bare feet. From the shadows, Daigo's voice rang out. "You chose your death, Ronin." Rintaro raised his katana, the steel catching the moonlight. "No," he said quietly. "I chose my silence to end here." The soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons. Somewhere above, a cherry blossom branch swayed, scattering petals that drifted between them like ghosts. The siege of the quiet samurai had begun. The night cracked open with a single command: "Forward, 5." Men crossed the threshold of Rintaro's gate, their sandals grinding against gravel. The glow of their lanterns bled over the wooden walls, painting everything in trembling amber. Rintaro stood in the doorway, the katana steady in his hands, its tip low, his breathing slower than the wind. The first man hesitated. He was young, probably no older than 20. Rintaro saw it, the tiny shake in the spearhead, the uncertainty behind the mask of obedience. He almost pitied him. Then the boy moved. Rintaro's blade rose once, curved like a flash of white fire, and fell. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, only the whisper of fabric parting, the soft collapse of flesh against wood. The others lunged together, shouting to fill the silence. Their weapons struck the walls, splintering the house's frame. Rintaro sidestepped, struck twice, and the shouting stopped. For a moment nothing moved except the falling petals from the branch above. Inside the house, Akiko covered her mouth. She'd seen blood before. Edo was not gentle, but never like this. Quiet, precise, inevitable. She wanted to cry out, but Rintaro's calm frightened her more than the killing itself. Outside, Daigo watched from the street. The first 5 hadn't even touched him. The captain frowned, then raised 2 fingers. Another 10 men stepped forward. "Don't rush him," Daigo said. "He's waiting for chaos. Make him wait longer." They spread out this time, circling the courtyard, moving in silence. Rintaro's eyes followed their shadows across the walls. His shoulder ached from an old wound, one he thought had healed years ago. It hadn't. It pulsed now with each heartbeat. The next attack came from 2 sides, one from the gate, one from the rear. Rintaro pivoted between them, letting the narrow path of the garden serve as a choke point. A spear struck first, glancing off a wooden pillar. He parried, stepped in, and cut the shaft cleanly in half. The man fell backward into his comrades, and for a moment the attack collapsed on itself. He could hear Akiko inside, her hurried steps, the rustle of her kimono as she moved deeper into the shadows. "Stay down," he called softly, not turning his head. Another came. Rintaro turned the blade sideways, deflecting the blow, and slammed the pommel against the man's throat. A muffled gasp, another fall. The courtyard stank of sweat and pine oil. The air grew thick, heavy with fear. When the 10th man dropped, the rest retreated, dragging the wounded into the street. For a brief, impossible moment, silence returned. Rintaro's chest rose and fell steadily, though blood now stained his sleeve. He wiped the blade once against his sash and looked toward the main road. Far down the road, more lanterns burned, dozens of them winding through the dark like the spine of a dragon. The night still had many eyes left to open. He knew they wouldn't stop. Daigo lowered his chin, studying the bodies. "He's better than they said," he muttered. "Fine, we change the field." One of the men hesitated. "You mean to burn him out?" Daigo's eyes flicked toward the Ochaya's distant roof. "If the fire doesn't take him, the smoke will. Either way, he'll come out." He turned to another soldier. "Bring the barrels." Inside the house, the air trembled with the smell of oil. Rintaro could sense it before he saw it. The faint shimmer of light beneath the door, the shift in the wind. Akiko emerged from the shadows, her face pale. "They're spreading oil outside," she said. "You have to leave," he shook his head. "Leave and draw them into the streets? There are homes, families. They'll burn them anyway if they think it kills you," she said, her voice breaking. Rintaro looked at her, really looked. "Then you should go." Her hands trembled, but she didn't move. "If you die here, I die here too." Something inside him twisted, not fear, not sorrow, but something older. He had seen that same look once before, in another woman's eyes, before another fire long ago. For a moment, the memory swallowed him, the flash of flames, the crying child he couldn't save, the smell of burning rice straw. His grip faltered. The katana felt heavier. "Rintaro?" Akiko whispered. He blinked. The house returned, the smoke curling through the cracks. The past faded, leaving only the present. He exhaled once, steadying his stance. "Then we'll choose the ground," he said. "Not them." He turned toward the rear door, where the corridor narrowed between the garden and the outer wall. It was small, barely wide enough for one man at a time. "Stay behind me," he said. Outside, the first flames began to climb the walls. The smoke reached them before the fire did. It slid through the cracks in the wood, thick and bitter, curling around Rintaro's face like a warning. Outside, the sound of crackling oil filled the air, followed by the low roar of burning pine. Akiko coughed, her eyes stinging. "They'll trap you inside!" Rintaro didn't answer. He moved through the shadows of his home, calm but alert, counting breaths, listening to the fire's rhythm. It wasn't uniform. It came from the right side near the storage room. He could still move through the corridor on the left. He opened a small chest near the door and took out an old sash of dark cloth. "Cover your mouth," he said, handing it to her. "The smoke will choke before the fire does." She obeyed, hands trembling as she tied the cloth around her face. Through the shifting haze, she watched him set his katana at an angle across the doorway. The blade caught the faint reflection of the flames outside. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "Not far," he said. "Only where they can't all come at once." The narrow corridor behind the house was half stone, half mud, bordered by the garden wall. It wasn't made for battle. It was barely wide enough for one man, but that was exactly why it would serve him. When the first soldier tried to break through the back entrance, Rintaro moved. The strike came fast, almost silent. The man fell before his body understood it had been cut. Another tried to force his way through, but the narrow path turned his spear useless. Rintaro parried, stepped in, and ended him with a single cut. The fire glowed brighter behind them. Throwing their shadows onto the wall, two figures locked in a dance of light and death. Inside, Akiko knelt near the doorway listening. Every crash, every muffled cry outside sounded closer. She wanted to scream his name, but feared it would break his focus. So she sat in silence, her hands clasped, praying to gods she no longer believed in. The next wave came with shields. They tried to push down the wall, but the corridor forced them to move in a single line. Rintaro struck low, his blade catching ankles, then rose with the follow-through. Two more dropped. One swung wildly and grazed Rintaro's arm. Blood ran down to his wrist, warm and sharp. He didn't flinch. Pain, to him, was an old companion. As the bodies piled, he dragged one aside to block the path, his own wall of flesh and armor. The others hesitated, seeing how narrow the way had become. Dago watched from the yard, frustration etched into his scarred face. "He's using the fire," he muttered. "We light the house, and he turns it into a shield." A soldier beside him asked, "Should we rush the corridor, Captain?" Daigo shook his head. "No, that's what he wants. We'll let the fire work for us. He'll tire. Smoke kills slower than steel, but it never misses." He gestured toward the east wall. "Bring archers. Aim for any movement inside. Force him back toward the flames." The next arrow pierced through the paper wall, embedding in the post beside Rintaro. Another followed, slicing across his shoulder. He ducked, rolled sideways, and kicked the body of a fallen man into the path of the next volley. Smoke filled his lungs. The corridor was no longer air, it was heat and ash. He coughed once, steadied himself, and glanced toward the doorway. Akiko was still there, her figure faint through the haze. "Out the back!" he shouted. "Through the garden wall!" "No!" she cried. "You'll die here alone!" He wanted to argue, but the fire was climbing fast. The roof cracked, and embers rained like stars gone mad. He stepped closer to her, his face darkened by soot. "If you stay, you'll burn," he said, gripping her hand. "There's a storage hatch behind the garden. Crawl through it. When you reach the stream, follow it west until the water cools your breath." She shook her head. "And you?" Rintaro smiled faintly, though his lips were blackened with smoke. "I'll follow when I can. The fire hides more than it kills." He pushed her gently toward the wall. She hesitated, tears streaking through the soot on her face, then obeyed. The sound of wood splintering drowned her sob. When he turned back, 3 men had entered the corridor. They thought the smoke would blind him. They were half right. He couldn't see clearly, but he could hear the crunch of their steps, the clink of steel brushing armor. He moved first. The katana sliced through the haze, catching the orange light of the flames. One fell instantly. The second stumbled into the third, both impaled by the same thrust. Rintaro withdrew the blade, gasping. He staggered back, lungs burning. Through the crack in the roof, he saw the moon, a pale circle behind a veil of smoke. The same moon that had hung over the tea house hours earlier. Somewhere beyond the wall, Akiko's muffled voice echoed faintly. "Rintaro." He wanted to answer, but his throat refused. Instead, he reached for the nearest wall, dragging himself upright. Daigo's voice came again, distant but sharp. "If he lives through this, he's earned his grave. Keep the fire going. When the house collapses, drag out what's left." Rintaro wiped the blood from his mouth. His vision swam. The heat pressed against his skin, but the corridor, his chosen path, still stood. He leaned the blade against his shoulder, listening to the fire's roar fade into the rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time since the siege began, he smiled. They thought the smoke would blind him, but he had lived in darkness far longer than they ever would. Smoke thinned as the wind shifted. The flames Daigo had ordered along the side wall no longer roared. They hissed and smoldered, throwing a dull orange light that made the yard look smaller than it was. Bodies blocked the narrow run behind the house. Rintaro had bled, but he was breathing evenly again, blade low, listening. Beyond the gate, the siege adjusted. Not 70 anymore. Too many had already fallen in the corridor and the yard, but still dozens remained, enough lanterns to paint the street in a broken line of gold. Daigo did not rush them now. He sent men in pairs to test angles, to rattle shutters, to scratch the nerves. A bowstring whispered. An arrow flicked through a paper panel and died in a beam. Another thunked into the threshold and quivered there, its feather trembling like a startled bird. Inside, Akiko crouched near the interior room, cloth tied over her mouth, eyes bright with smoke and fear. Rintaro knelt beside her for a moment, palm of his free hand touching the floor to feel the vibration of steps outside. "They won't stop," she said. He nodded. "They'll change shape first. How many are left?" "Enough to end a name," he said, and then softer. "But not the story that follows it." She looked at his face, the soot on his cheek, the thin line of blood drying at his jaw, and swallowed what she wanted to say. "If you die here, my part won't be to watch. You warned me," he said. "That's not nothing. It isn't enough." Outside, a drum started. Not loud, one measured beat, a pause, another. It wasn't meant to frighten. It was meant to mark time, to tell the men where to put their fear. Between beats, Daigo's orders moved like a colder wind. Archers left. 2 at the rear. "Watch the roofline. Keep pressure." No heroics, Rintaro exhaled. The drum would tighten breath, slow reactions. It was smart soldiering. He rose and pulled a low chest across the floor, wedging it under a sagging beam to keep the roof from dipping farther. The house groaned like an old horse. His vision stung, then cleared. "Rintaro," Akiko said, voice uneven. "If they take me, they won't," he said. "You saw the corridor. One at a time I can manage. That's not what I mean." Her hand went to her sleeve. "If they name me," he turned. "Name you?" She drew out a slim piece of lacquer, worn smooth. The moon crest etched at its center caught what little light the room still had. He recognized the symbol. Everyone in Edo did. It was not Yasumori's mark. It belonged to a greater house upriver, a pillar clan, whose banners still hung in provincial halls. "You should have left that at the Ochaya," he said. "It was left for me," she answered. "Years ago. I'm not only what I seem," the words cost her. "My mother served in that house. I was pushed out with coin and silence. The name behind this crest would deny me in daylight, but men like Yasumori know enough to make a threat from it." Rintaro looked at the crest, then at her. The insult in the tea house had not been random after all. It had been calculated, the kind of cruelty that seeks a seam in a person and pries it open in public. He felt his grip tighten, not on his sword, but on the idea that had made him stand. "So they don't just want my death," he said. "They want your shame," Akiko nodded once. "If they name me before men like these, I become something to trade. And every place I walk becomes unsafe." Rintaro weighed it quickly, Daigo's patience. Yasumori's pride, a crest that could bend the city's spine if spoken aloud. The siege was no longer a ring of steel. It was a net of rumor waiting to be thrown. He sheathed the katana halfway and listened for the drumbeat again. "It's not just a fight," he said. "It's a lesson." "For whom?" she asked. "For anyone who thinks a voice can be bought." He slid the blade home with a soft click and stood. "They'll try to pull me into the street. The corridor worked because I chose it. If I keep choosing, the night stays mine." A scatter of pebbles rang off the roof tiles. Rintaro moved to the open section of wall and peered through the charred ribs of the house. The lantern line had thinned where the bodies lay. Beyond them, dozens of lights shifted, regrouped. He saw Daigo at the center, not yelling, just watching, jaw set, the old scar on his cheek a white cut in the dark. Rintaro stepped back and spoke low. "They'll likely bring someone to talk. They'll try to unmake me with words before they try again with arrows, as they did with me," Akiko said. He nodded. "Words leave fewer scars on the men who use them." The drum stopped. Footsteps approached, two, then one. The house breathed with the night. A figure stepped into view at the gate, hands empty, helmet off. He was older than Rintaro by a few winters, hair gone to iron, shoulders still soldier straight. He did not carry himself like a messenger. "Rintaro of the Fallen Crest," he called, voice steady, without echo. "My name is Kenta. I served on the northern roads when you did. You pulled me from a ditch at Anikawa. I've not forgotten." Rintaro's fingers tightened around the scabbard. The ditch, a snowstorm, a broken spear haft. He remembered a man choking on blood and refusing to die in the cold. He had dragged that man back to a fire. He remembered the singed hair smell when the arrow came later, and how the body that took it was not his. "You wear Yasumori's colors," Rintaro said. "I wear my captain's orders," Kenta answered, not defensive. "And I carry a choice you might take. Lay down the blade. Step out unarmed. The young lord will spare the woman's name and grant you a clean end." Akiko drew in a breath as if she'd been struck. Rintaro did not look at her. He watched the older soldier's face, the way it didn't beg, the way it offered. It was a trap, but it was also a truth. Some men here would prefer not to feed the fire with more bodies. "Your captain speaks through you," Rintaro said. "Does he also bleed through you?" Kenta's mouth twitched. "He bleeds on his own. He respects a man who stands. But orders are orders. If you refuse, the name will be spoken, and every alley in this city will learn it by morning." Rintaro glanced down at the moon crest in Akiko's hand. The blade inside him, that old invisible one, turned a notch. Bushido spoke easily of death. It said less about living with what your death might do to another. Impermanence was a comfort to monks. For men like him, it could become an excuse. He raised his voice enough for Daigo to hear. "Clean ends are gifts men give themselves when they're afraid of dirtying their hands." The silence that followed was not empty. It held the scrape of a bowstring, the slow draw of breath in 100 chests, the small sound Akiko made when she closed her fingers around the crest. Rintaro spoke to her without turning. Whatever they say, you are not their word. One line, half prayer, half promise. Stories outlive the men who try to silence them. Then to Kenta, tell your captain I decline, and tell him something else. He has fewer men than he thinks. The corridor took more than your drum can steady. Kenta dipped his head once, respect without surrender. Then I hope your end is worthy of the beginning, he said, and stepped back into the dark. The drum returned, faster now. Lanterns shifted, the bowstrings sang again, and from the eastern alley a rough cheer rose, men dragging a heavy shape toward the yard. Not oil this time, a beam, a battering ram. The drumbeat stopped. For a heartbeat the night held its breath. Then the sound of wood scraping against stone rose from the street, deep, heavy, and deliberate. They're bringing a ram, Rintaro said. Akiko looked toward the doorway, where the fire's glow flickered across the smoke-stained frame. Can the wall hold? For a while. He pressed his hand against the beam beside him. The wood was old, tired, like him, but not forever. The first impact came. A thunderclap of splintering pine. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin grey lines. The second blow followed almost immediately, louder. Akiko flinched. They'll break through, Rintaro nodded. Then we move before they do. He led her toward the back, where the garden wall still stood, blackened but intact. The smoke had thinned. The wind favored them now. He could hear Daigo's men shouting orders outside, the sound of shifting boots and snapping ropes. Once they break through, they'll pour in like water, Rintaro said. But a flood only runs one way. He picked up a fallen spear from the floor, short, cracked at the shaft, but still sharp enough. Help me with this. Together, they wedged the spear between two beams, creating a narrow gap in the wall's rear corner. Rintaro pressed his shoulder against it until the wood gave slightly. Cold air rushed through, carrying the smell of the river beyond. Akiko's voice trembled. If we run, they'll chase, he said. And the men outside don't need an order to kill a fleeing woman. The ram struck again. The house shuddered. A split opened along the front post, wood screaming under pressure. Rintaro turned to her. If the wall falls, stay behind me. Use the garden stones to cover your steps. The moon's behind the smoke. It will hide us for a little while. Akiko nodded but didn't move away. You could leave, she said quietly. They want you, not me. Rintaro almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. You think they'd let you live after tonight? She looked down. I think they'll take pleasure in pretending they might. The next crash sent a shower of debris down between them. The main post buckled but didn't collapse. Rintaro steadied it with his shoulder, teeth clenched against the strain. Akiko rushed forward to brace it with her hands, though she was half his size. Go, he said through the effort. Find the opening we made. I'm not leaving you, she said. Then we'll leave together. Another strike. The wall cracked wider. Through the gap, Rintaro saw shapes moving, fewer than before, but enough to finish what had begun. He could hear Daigo's voice over the chaos, steady, unhurried, a man who believed time itself served him. Bring him down alive, Daigo ordered. Let the noble choose how he dies, alive. The word carried weight. This wasn't mercy, it was humiliation. Yasamori wanted to look into the eyes of the man who'd shamed him. Rintaro's pulse slowed. The choice ahead was clear: escape and let Akiko's name burn through Edo by morning, or stay and bury that shame with his own blood. He looked at her. You said once that music can make silence bearable, he said. Remember that if the silence comes too soon. Her eyes glistened. If it does, I'll fill it with your name. The next blow split the post completely. The front wall sagged inward, a gaping wound. Firelight poured through, revealing silhouettes. Soldiers crouched behind the ram, less than 50 now, but determined. Rintaro stepped back, raising his blade. Stay low. The wall gave way. Smoke and splinters exploded inward as the first 3 men entered through the gap. They expected weakness. They met precision. The first thrust came high, parried and countered in a single motion. The second swung low, met with a turning step and a rising cut. The third tried to grab him, and fell before his hands reached air. The noise drew others. 5 more pressed in, weapons flashing. Rintaro retreated toward the garden, using the narrowing space to limit them. One blade caught his side, grazing deep enough to burn. He ignored it. Pain had a place, and it was not here. "Back!" one shouted. "He's bleeding!" Rintaro lunged before the man finished. The katana sliced through torchlight, extinguishing it mid-arc. The sudden dark froze the men long enough for him to strike again. Two more fell, the rest stumbling over their bodies. Daigo's voice cut through the din. "Hold your ground! He's tiring!" He was right. Rintaro's arm trembled. His breath came ragged. Every heartbeat echoed in his wounded side. He stepped back into the garden, where Akiko waited, clutching the lacquered crest to her chest. "They'll come again," she said. "Yes," he answered. "But they'll come slower." From the street, Daigo shouted new orders. "Archers, front line! Fire through the gaps!" Rintaro pulled Akiko behind the stone lantern. Arrows hissed through the openings, clattering against walls, piercing the air where they had stood seconds earlier. One shaft struck the lacquer crest in her hand, splitting the surface cleanly in two. She gasped as half the moon symbol fell to the ground. Rintaro looked at it, half a crest, half a truth. He picked it up and pressed it into her palm. "Then it's done," he said. "They can't use what's broken." Akiko blinked, realization dawning. By destroying the emblem, he had cut their weapon of shame in half. But Daigo misunderstood the silence that followed. "He's hit!" he called. "Move in!" Rintaro stood again, blood dark on his sleeve, his stance low. "Let them come," he whispered. The next wave advanced, not with confidence but with anger, a wall of torches and blades. Rintaro waited until their light reached the stones, then struck the torch nearest to the spilled oil from earlier. Flame burst upward, a curtain of fire separating the garden from the street. The attackers staggered back, blinded, coughing. Through the wall of flame, Rintaro's silhouette loomed, half man, half ghost. Daigo froze, realizing too late that the ronin had turned the battlefield again. "Pull back!" he shouted. "Regroup!" The firelight trembled on Rintaro's face as he turned toward Akiko. "It's not over," he said. "But they won't see clearly again tonight." She nodded, gripping his arm to steady him as his knees weakened. The house creaked behind them, ready to fall, and somewhere beyond the flames, Yasumori's banner rose, its silver crescent shining faintly through the smoke. The man who ordered the siege was finally coming to see it himself. The fire had burned low. What was once a home was now a skeleton of beams and smoke. Rintaro sat against the last standing post, his breath shallow, his sleeve pressed to the wound at his side. The katana rested across his knees, the steel dulled by ash but unbroken. Akiko knelt beside him, tearing fabric from her kimono to bind the bleeding. "You can't hold the line much longer," she said. He gave a faint smile. "The line holds itself now. The dead have their weight." Outside, the night had gone quieter but not empty. Voices murmured low, shifting positions. The soldiers were waiting for new orders, waiting for their lord. Rintaro could feel the air change. Pride had a sound. It was the silence before the noble arrived to witness his own revenge. Akiko looked toward the garden wall, where the half-broken crest lay in the dust. "He'll come himself now," she whispered. Rintaro nodded. "A man like Yasumori can't let others finish what began in his name." He adjusted his grip on the sword. The motion brought a tremor to his arm. The blood had dried, but weakness crept in behind it. Akiko noticed. "You're fading." "I faded before," he said. "Once on a winter field, once on a burning road. The body goes where duty calls, even if the soul is tired of following." She hesitated. "You speak as if you've done this before. Not just fighting, but dying." Rintaro's eyes drifted to the blade. "Once, long ago, I did something that should have killed me." He turned the sword slightly, so the faint moonlight caught the engraving near the guard. A barely visible line, shaped like a river. "This was never my sword," he said. "It belonged to a farmer. I killed him when the war ended, not in battle but in hunger. He had food, I had none. I took what was his, and the sword came with it." Akiko froze. "You," he nodded once. "That day, the blade became a weight I could never put down. Every time I drew it after that, it asked the same question. Was I protecting or taking again? He exhaled, the sound thin but steady. That's why I stopped drawing it. Until tonight, Akiko touched the bloodied hilt. Then why now? Rintaro's gaze didn't leave the steel. Because this time I knew who I was standing for. The words hung there, not heroic but honest. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint jingle of reins and armor. Lanterns flickered. The air thickened again. Akiko straightened, glancing toward the front gate. He's here. Rintaro forced himself to stand. The movement drew a grimace across his face, but he stayed upright. Then let him see what his pride has cost. For a moment neither spoke. The house creaked. The last flames died. The night waited. Then, through the smoke, Yasumori appeared. He did not wear armor, only a lacquered coat and the crescent of his family crest at his chest. His expression was calm, almost curious. Daigo walked behind him, eyes down. So this is where a ronin makes his grave, Yasumori said softly. And for what? A woman's trembling hands? Rintaro met his gaze. For silence that deserved to be heard. The noble stepped closer, glancing at Akiko. She's not what she pretends. You defend a lie. She's what she's had to become, Rintaro answered. That makes her truer than any man hiding behind a crest. Yasumori smiled faintly. And yet you both hide. Behind walls, behind fire, behind old sins. His eyes flicked toward the sword. You think that blade makes you clean? I know its story. Rintaro's grip tightened. You know nothing. Oh, I know enough, Yasumori said. That sword was found in Onikawa, a dead farmer's blood on it. You took it, didn't you? The righteous man who preaches honor, holding a murderer's relic. The words hit like arrows. Akiko's breath caught. Rintaro said nothing. He couldn't. Yasumori stepped closer, savoring the silence. That's the problem with men like you. You think killing for the right reason changes what killing is. The silence stretched. Rintaro finally spoke. Perhaps. But it also teaches you which reasons are worth dying for. His tone was calm, almost resigned. He looked down at the sword, at the reflection of the firelight trembling on its surface. It took a life to feed me once. Tonight it gives mine back. Akiko's voice broke the stillness. Rintaro! He turned to her. Go to the stream. Don't look back. She didn't move. Tears streaked her face. If I go, I'll only hear the sound and wonder. He smiled, faint, tired, real. Then remember this moment instead. Outside, Daigo shifted his stance, uneasy. Yasumori's smirk faded slightly. He had expected defiance, not peace. Rintaro raised the sword, the point angled downward, a stance of defense, not aggression. You wanted to see my shame, he said quietly. Now you'll see what a man does with it. Yasumori's jaw clenched. Kill him! Daigo hesitated, then gave the order. Archers, ready! A soft wind crossed the yard, lifting ash and petals alike, and here the narrator's voice drops, almost breaking the fourth wall. If you've walked this far with him, tell me, what would you fight for if honor itself asked for your life? The words linger like a prayer. Rintaro stepped forward as the first arrow was loosed. The arrows came like rain. They tore through smoke and splinters, piercing what little remained of the house. One grazed Rintaro's shoulder, another sank into a beam beside his head. He didn't flinch. He stepped forward into the courtyard, each footfall scattering ash. Behind him, Akiko ducked behind a fallen wall, covering her head. "Rintaro!" she cried. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the street, where shadows moved in formation. The archers were done. Now came the soldiers, what was left of them, no more than 40, but still enough to drown a man if they reached him all at once. Daigo's voice cut through the chaos. "Leave him breathing. Lord Yasumori wants his lesson alive." Rintaro smiled faintly. Alive, he thought. The word had lost meaning hours ago. He moved toward the gate, sword raised. The steel caught the reflection of the noble's banner, silver crescent over black cloth, fluttering just beyond the smoke. The men saw him step forward, and for the first time some hesitated. The first charge broke. Rintaro met them at the threshold. His body no longer felt pain. It simply remembered motion. Every strike was a line in a language only warriors knew, the grammar of survival, the poetry of endings. A spear lunged from the left. He twisted, cut low, rose into the next man's throat. Two blades flashed at once. He turned one aside with his forearm, caught the other's hilt with his free hand, and drove both down together. Blood ran across the stones. The rhythm of death was not a roar, it was a heartbeat. Dago advanced, leaving his men behind. The captain's scar caught the firelight like a second mouth. "Enough," he said, drawing his kodachi. "Let me finish what you started." Rintaro steadied himself. "I didn't start this." Daigo stepped into the ring of light. "No," he said, circling slowly. "But you made it matter." They clashed, short blade against long, speed against endurance. The sound of steel on steel echoed through the empty yard, a rhythm older than words. Dago struck first, fast and precise, aiming for the wound at Rintaro's side. The ronin turned the cut, countered, but the pain flared through him. He faltered a half step. Dago pressed harder. "You should have run," Dago said. "A name isn't worth dying for." Rintaro blocked the next blow, their faces inches apart. "Then you've never had one worth keeping." Dago drove him back, each strike heavier, more desperate. He fought not just to win, but to silence something in himself. When his blade caught Rintaro's sleeve, tearing the cloth, Rintaro saw the tremor in his enemy's hand. "You follow orders," Rintaro said, voice low. "But you don't believe them." Dago froze for a heartbeat, just long enough. Rintaro twisted, stepped inside, and disarmed him. The kodachi clattered to the ground. For an instant they stood face to face, two men who understood too much about duty and too little about peace. Rintaro lowered his sword slightly. "Go," he said. "This isn't your shame." Dago stared at him, breathing hard. The scar on his cheek seemed to burn red. Then he turned away, retreating toward Yasumori. The soldiers parted for him. Yasumori's eyes burned with fury. "Coward!" he spat. "All of you." He drew his own blade, a ceremonial tachi too ornate for war, gleaming like deceit itself. "If my men won't finish you, I will," Akiko cried out from behind the debris. "Yasumori, stop." "You've done enough," the noble sneered. "You'll speak when I allow it, half-blood." Rintaro's head lifted at the words. His jaw tightened. "Say it again." Yasumori smirked, raising the blade. "Half-blood, pretender, a shadow that thinks itself light." He lunged. The blades met with a crash that shook the courtyard. Yasumori's strength was surprising, driven by humiliation and fear. Rintaro barely parried, his body faltering under exhaustion. The noble pressed his advantage, shouting with each strike, his movements wild. "You thought honor made you clean? You thought silence made you pure?" Rintaro stepped back, deflecting blow after blow, until his heel struck a fallen beam. He stumbled, barely keeping balance. Yasumori saw it and grinned. "You die on your knees, Ronin." But the next swing went wide. Rintaro ducked under it, his sword rising in a slow, perfect arc. The motion was deliberate, almost peaceful. The tip of his blade met Yasumori's chest, as if guided by fate. For a second, both men froze. The noble's smile vanished. He looked down at the steel that had found him. Rintaro exhaled. "No man dies clean," he said quietly. He stepped back as Yasumori collapsed, the tachi slipping from his hand. The silver crescent on his chest dimmed in the firelight. Silence fell. The remaining soldiers stared, their discipline broken. Some dropped their weapons. Others fled into the shadows. Akiko rushed forward, her sleeves streaked with ash and blood. "Rintaro!" He lowered the sword. His hands shook. The wound at his side had opened again. Blood spread across his robes. "It's done," she said, voice trembling. "It's over." He looked at her, faintly smiling. "Nothing ends. It only stops mattering." She tried to hold him upright, but his weight was too much. They sank together to the ground, beside the fallen noble. Distant thunder rolled over Edo, or maybe it was the last echo of the drums. Rintaro glanced down at the katana, its blade darkened with soot and blood. "Tell them," he whispered. "The sword's curse ended here." Akiko pressed his hand to her chest. "Don't speak like that." He looked up at her, eyes steady. "No, listen. You carry the story now." She nodded, tears falling freely. I will. He leaned his head back against the broken post, eyes half closed. For the first time since the war, he looked at peace. The fire flickered, dimmed, and the moon reappeared through the smoke. Pale, unbroken, whole. Dawn came without color. Only the faint grey of ash drifting across the yard marked where night had ended. The fire had burned itself out, leaving smoke curling from the ruins like the last breath of a dying dream. Akiko sat beside what remained of the house. Her kimono was torn, her hands streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear. Rintaro's body lay where he had fallen, upright against the broken post, the katana resting across his lap. She had cleaned the blade as best she could, though blood still traced the edge. No soldiers remained. Daigo had disappeared into the fog with the few men who survived. Yasumori's banner, trampled and burned, lay half-buried in mud. Akiko rose slowly, her knees stiff from hours of stillness. She crossed to Rintaro and knelt once more. "They'll call you a fool," she whispered. "They'll say you died for nothing." Her fingers brushed the scar on his hand, the one that had always looked like a crescent moon. "But I'll remember. You died for the silence that deserved to be heard." The wind stirred, scattering ashes like petals. She looked toward the stream beyond the garden, the one he had told her to follow if she survived. The water moved quietly, washing away soot and blood alike. She stood, lifted the sword, and bowed her head. "You don't belong to death," she said softly. "You belong to the story now." She wrapped the katana in cloth and began walking. By noon, the streets of Edo whispered again. Rumor traveled faster than truth. They said a lone ronin had faced 70 men and survived until dawn, that he had killed their lord, that he had died standing. Some said the geisha he protected vanished into the mountains. Others said she played her shamisen every spring near a ruined bridge, her songs full of names no one recognized. Akiko walked for days, following the river north. Her feet bled, but she didn't stop. At night, she camped beneath cherry trees, their blossoms long since fallen. She carried no money, only the sword and the broken half of the moon crest, a reminder of the name she no longer needed. In a small village near the border, she traded the sword for a burial mound and a single pine marker. The villagers built it quietly, no questions asked. On the marker she wrote one word: silence. When they asked if it was a name, she smiled faintly. It was everything he stood for. Years passed. The ruins of Rintaro's home became a field of grass. Children played where warriors had fallen. Travelers left coins by the marker. Monks offered prayers without knowing why. One spring, when the blossoms returned, a young samurai stopped by the stream and asked an old man about the mound by the tree. "They say a ronin once lived here," the old man said. "He angered the wrong people and paid for it with his life." "Was he brave?" the samurai asked. The old man thought for a moment. "Brave, yes, but not in the way you think. He didn't fight to live. He fought so that someone else could." The samurai bowed his head and left a single petal on the stone. The wind lifted it, carrying it toward the mountains. Far away, in a quiet inn hidden beyond the border, Akiko sat by a window. Her hair had silvered, her shamisen leaned against the wall. She no longer performed for patrons, only for herself. That night, as rain began to fall, she played a melody she hadn't touched in years. The same one that had died on her strings the night Yasumori insulted her. This time the note held steady, her eyes closed. In her mind she saw the courtyard again, the flicker of flame, the arc of a blade, the faint smile of a man who had found peace inside chaos. She finished the song and whispered into the quiet. "Your story reached them, Rintaro, even the ones who'll never know your name." The rain grew louder, washing over the roof, filling the silence between each breath. Outside, the petals began to fall again, bright against the dark. Honor is not what survives you, it's what refuses to die with you. If stories like this still move you, walk with us through the ashes of old Japan. Subscribe and keep the fire alive among the shadows of forgotten men.